Now, voting is underway in Italy's general election. Polling stations opened 2 hours ago. Opinion polls taken during the campaign suggest the country will get its first ever female prime minister and its first far-right leader since Mussolini in Giorgia Meloni. A win for her party would be expected to see the return of Silvio Berlusconi and Matteo Salvini to government, two men who've had ties to Russia's President Putin. Our Rome correspondent Mark Lowen reports.
There are some things that Italians agree on. They've got the best coffee and food, and many they don't. Politics is one of them, and it's at the fore today in a crunch election.
It was sparked in July when the Prime Minister Mario Draghi lost the support of his coalition partners. So-called Super Mario had stabilised this politically volatile country amidst the COVID pandemic and war in Ukraine. Giorgia Meloni's far-right Brothers of Italy has led the polls. She wants tax cuts, a naval blockade of Libya to stop migrant boats, and is hardline on LGBT rights. Her party has neo-fascist roots, but she vehemently rejects the label. She's in coalition with the ultranationalist League of Matteo Salvini and the ex-Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, known as much for his bunga-bunga sex parties as his centre-right politics. Fighting them is Enrico Letta, pro-Europe and pro-civil rights, but he failed to form a broad centre-left coalition. He fell out with the once anti-establishment Five Star movement that came top last time but has plummeted. It's hoping its social welfare policies will save it now. So how will the poll affect the war in Ukraine? Mario Draghi has been a big supporter of Kiev. And while Giorgia Meloni backs that, her coalition partners have had close ties with Vladimir Putin, and Salvini has even suggested dropping sanctions on Moscow due to the energy crisis.
So this election matters, both here, with Italy perhaps about to elect its first woman prime minister and first far-right leader since Mussolini, and abroad, with implications for its relationship with Europe. But this country's had almost 70 governments since the Second World War, so we might just be back here again next year.
Well, let's go live to our Europe correspondent Jessica Parker, who's in Verona in northern Italy. Hi, Jessica. So what are people there saying to you about their concerns and what they'll be voting about?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think the most striking thing talking to people is the sense of apathy, or rather people are just a bit fed up that they're having to go to the polls after the collapse of Mario Draghi's unity government in the summer. And certainly quite a lot of people I've spoken to yesterday, ahead of polling day today, didn't even know who they were going to be voting for. But in terms of the issues that people talk about, tax often comes up. So I think Giorgia Meloni's pledge of tax cuts has gone down quite well with voters here in northern Italy. We're in a region that is a relatively wealthy part of the country, but that policy does seem to be popular, although the centre-left as well are promising a level of tax cuts. Immigration comes up as an issue as well that people want to see a tough line on, and energy costs. Now, that's, of course, an issue familiar with people across Europe at the moment. Surging energy costs, a real problem for households, for businesses as well. They really want to see some help or further help on that. So I think those are some of the kind of key issues that come up when you speak to voters here as they head to the polls.
Yeah, and Jessica, Giorgia Meloni has talked openly about doing more, she says, to defend Italy's national interests. How concerned are the EU by her possible election and what may happen thereafter?
I think it's a bit of a mixed picture, actually. So you're right. She's talked about asserting Italy's national interest. That's as the EU has already been battling with Hungary's Viktor Orban. And so there's this sense that if you add another nationalist into the mix, that it's going to be very problematic for the European Union. Italy, of course, the third largest economy within the EU. It really matters what happens here. However, some diplomats I've spoken to in Brussels relatively relaxed about the situation because they think if she does become prime minister in some sort of coalition, domestic issues are going to keep her very busy. And she has softened her tone in terms of the EU over recent years. So I think it's quite hard at the moment to know for sure how big the impact could be on Brussels. But of course, the outgoing Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, very much liked in Brussels, former head of the European Central Bank. So I think if Giorgia Meloni does become Prime Minister of Italy, it's certainly going to be seen as something of a challenge for the European Union. As I say, They already feel they're dealing with what they regard as errant nationalist governments in Poland, but particularly Hungary. And they wouldn't want Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister there, to have another ally in the room.
OK, Jessica in Verona, thank you.